Hi everyone and welcome to Value Open Source, our podcast about everything that's related to open source, and I'm very excited to host today Eldad Fux. Hi Eldad, nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Eldad is the creator of appwrite.io, a secure open source backend server for web and mobile developers. A crazy, interesting product, so check it out after this podcast. So Eldad, thanks again for coming.
Thank you for having me again.
And can you tell us a bit about your experience in software development and how you got into open source?
Yeah, sure. So I think I started coding when I was about 12 or 13.
So early.
Yeah. And I started with open source. It was the only available set of technologies that I can actually use without paying for. As a 13-year-old boy, I didn't have any credit card to use like Microsoft servers and stuff like that. So I started very early.
So your parents didn't get you a Microsoft server for your bar mitzvah?
No, I wish. So I really used just PHP, Linux, and stuff like that, and free servers that were available at the time. And ever since then, I'm dedicated to open source. And
so you actually started with open source, because a lot of people came to open source just after they started with software development.
Yeah, it was actually my only option. It was the only way I could write code and stuff like that on my own. And
that's awesome. That's a great way to start. So can you tell us a bit about appwrite and what brought you to develop it, and why did you make it open source from the beginning?
Yeah, sure. When I first became a CTO back in the day, it was really hard to manage like multiple group of teams and developers. And it's much easier when you are a team leader or something like that and you sit with your developers all day. And it was really hard to like enforce quality and design an architecture on your product and services. And you could see like that developers were doing the same jobs all over again, like, across different teams. So what appwrite is really trying to be is like a single entry point where developers can actually use all the common things they need. Like if they need storage, database, image manipulations, user authentication, they can just turn into that service and that API.
So it's like a reusable units of code that people can use again and again?
Yeah, and it's packaged as a Docker container, so you can actually just install it with the Docker Compose very, very easily. It's just one line command in your terminal, and it's good to go. You get an API with everything packed into it, and you can just start writing code. You can integrate it into your own project and start a new project.
That's awesome. And what's the status of the project? How is it going?
Well, we've just launched a few months ago, and we're getting really good traction from the community. The community is really starting to build up. We have our own Discord server, and people are starting to contribute code.
Great.
And they are really starting to give us a lot of feedback and suggest new features and stuff. So we're doing really well right now, and we keep on working for the next release to reach the first stable version of appwrite.
Awesome. That's great. And can you tell us a bit, why did you decided to make it open source from the beginning?
Yeah, so I've been into open source from such a young age, and I always said to myself, like, I have to contribute back. I have to do something like to have the opportunity to give something back to the community. And open source, beside that, open source has so many advantages. It's like it improves your code, it improves the way you write and design stuff. It's really influence the way you architect your software, because other people should come and contribute to it. Yeah. So you really need to make your code accessible, and not just for reading it, it's for actually adding code.
And do you get feedback from the community, and have you made changes to the product with that feedback?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of feedbacks, and it's really helping us to like understand where appwrite can go and what it can become. And anyone who wants to give us feedback can just go to our GitHub repository.
Okay, so check it out and make sure you contribute. It's a great project and you should definitely try it.
Yeah.
So another thing that was interesting about appwrite is that it rose to be quite popular pretty fast. I think from 0 stars to almost 2,000 stars in just a few months. And I was wondering, what tips can you give our viewers about promoting open source projects like yours? Yeah,
so the first tip is, this kind of thing doesn't happen alone. It's not a magic. I think that if you want to have a very successful open source project, you need to put a lot of effort on marketing. and creating content about your project, having good documentation, having developers, communicating with developers, and it's a lot of work on creating content and knowledge base around your project.
So it's mostly content, or are there like other venues you can find more traffic to bring to your project?
We launched the project back in September, so we had Oktoberfest in the middle, and like giving swag and stuff like that's really helpful.
Oh, like swag for Oktoberfest?
Yeah, we're giving away stickers and stuff like that.
So you had like a lot of drunk developers during Oktoberfest working on your code base.
Yeah, something like that.
There was a lot of rejected pull requests, I guess. So can you give like tips for developers who are just starting with a new project, like actionable tips that they could do to promote their project?
Yeah, so I think the first thing a developer wanting to write an open source project is like solve a meaningful problem that can actually help someone.
Provide value.
Yeah, like provide value. And other than that, you should really like build an ecosystem around your project. It can't be just your code. It needs to be about the knowledge base, about the documentation, about an accessible website, and like share and spread us that knowledge.
Okay, and what about social media and other venues? Like, did you use social media to promote your project?
Yeah, sure. Social media has been great for us. We promoted the project a lot on a lot of Facebook groups, developers Facebook groups, on Reddit. Hacker News was a great tool for us to promote appwrite. We got a lot of traffic from there, and that's it. Like you really need to put yourself in the front and like promote the project.
Yeah, so it's not enough just putting it on GitHub. You have to work at it.
No, unfortunately, it isn't. And we as developers, we don't like to talk a lot. We like to write code. So you really need to get out of your comfort zone and like be in the front and talk about your project, explain about it, and write a lot of content that support and create knowledge base around it.
Yeah. That's interesting because, you know, a lot of people think that just putting a piece of code on GitHub and wait for the stars to come from the sky, and it doesn't happen.
If someone managed to do that, please tell me.
Let me know.
Yeah, let me know.
All right. So, besides promoting a project, if I was like a young open source developer or a young developer just starting out and I wanted to get into open source, what tips could you give me?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of way to contribute to open source project and not just writing code. Like when we think about how can I contribute, the first thought we get is like, I want to write code. But there's a lot of other things. You can just use the project and give feedback to the maintainers. You can spread the word about the project. You can write a tutorial. You can write a simple demo app. There is a lot of ways you can contribute to open source projects, not just writing code. And at the end, you can actually write code when you get into the project, when you know how to use it, when you know its goals, its mission statement, what problem is it trying to solve.
And would you, as a young developer, would you recommend starting from contributing to existing projects or starting a new one from scratch?
Well, I think there are pros and cons to both ways, but I would probably go with smaller ones. Yes, it will be easier and more acceptable from the maintainers.
Yeah.
They just want to get help and they don't care who you are and what your skill set.
As long as you're helping.
As long as you're helping, but once you get more experience, you can definitely contribute to bigger projects as well.
Okay, so contribution like as a way of getting into open source is probably like not limited just to code. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. I think it's like a misconception in the community, and open source project can really use other help, not just by writing code.
So I not necessarily have to be a developer to contribute.
No,
I can be a graphics artist, or I can be a writer.
Yeah, and actually in appwrite during Oktoberfest, we had a lot of people contributing their first time. It was just a translation or something, or a lot of people that just want to fix our README. I think we have a perfect README file. Like we got maybe 50.
Yeah, I saw it. It looks very good.
Not 50, but maybe 15 pull requests only about README.
That's great.
It was a great way to let other people try and get into open source, and hopefully they will continue and have bigger and more meaningful contribution along the way.
That's great. So moving on with open source monetization. We've spoken about promotion. How do you feel about monetizing open source projects?
Well, I think we as a community should really find good ways to let maintainers monetize and profit from their open source project, because once they don't really have a way of profiting from it, we see a lot of projects get neglected or abandoned, and then you need to find the alternatives and start the projects from scratch, and maybe sometimes people will take over, but that's not really common. So I think we as a community, we must find ways and tools like xscode and GitHub sponsorship and stuff like that to help give motivation to maintainers to stay in their project, to contribute to them, to keep growing them and releasing updates. And it's really important to the entire tech ecosystem, because a lot of companies are relying on open source, a lot of open side projects are relying on open source, and it's really important that we find a way to value the maintainers. It's really important.
Or value open source.
Or value open source, yeah.
So basically you're saying that we are saying that monetization is in the best interests of everyone involved with open source, both developing and using.
Yeah, I think it's beyond open source. It's about the tech industry, and it's about everything, because open source is everywhere. It's in hospitals, it's in city, municipalities and stuff like that.
It is definitely everywhere.
Yeah, it's in everyone's interest.
That's great. That's actually, a lot of people feel that sometimes that open source has to be free. It's free software, it needs to be free. And I disagree. I think that open source developers are entitled to be compensated for their work.
Yeah, I think more than open source should be free. Open source is a way of writing code before it's free or not free. It doesn't have to be free, just a way to write code. It's a development workflow. Before it's like saying if it's
it's not a business model.
Yeah, it's not about the business model. It's about the way we write code. It's about the way we share it. It's about the way we release it with the community, with others. And monetization is a whole other issue. And open source can be free, but it also can be monetized. The most important thing is that the industry will flourish and will support open source in a way that...
I cannot agree more.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some things specifically about you. How do you as a developer keep learning and evolving?
Well, I don't think I have any fancy ways of learning, but surrounding yourself with developers and a lot of talk about development during lunches at work, it's very, very helpful. But being in the right Facebook groups, Reddit servers... Can
you recommend a few?
Mainly local ones, I think. A lot in the local community, but also like reading a lot posts of Medium, Smashing Magazine, stuff like that. It's really helpful, and surrounding yourself with knowledge. Always have spare time to read and learn, and don't neglect it ever. Always
a good idea. And we finish off every episode of this videocast with a short quiz. Answer from your gut. So Mac or PC?
Mac.
Mac, all right. Browser of choice?
Probably Chrome.
Probably Chrome, all right. Which IDE do you use?
Oh, Visual Code.
Visual Code, all right. GitHub, Bitbucket, or GitLab?
Oh, that's a tough one. I've been in all of them.
We've all been in all of them. Which do you like best?
It's hard to say. Probably GitHub or GitLab. Probably one of them.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
I think Star Trek.
Okay. Game of choice, if you game?
I'm a huge Manchester United fan and I play FIFA a lot.
All right. And last but not least, your top 3 open source projects, not yours.
Yeah, it's of course not mine. Wow, that's a tough one. Probably for first place, I would go with Docker. I think they really revolutionized the industry with the way you package software and deliver it. I don't think appwrite would have been existed without Docker. It would have taken you hours to install it.
Yeah.
Now it takes you only 2 minutes. And for second, I'd probably go with Ubuntu. I think they really revolutionized the way you use Linux, and opened it for wider crowds that usually weren't using Linux before. They really made it accessible.
With the whole GUI and everything that looks so nice and so easy to work with.
Yeah, and it's really, it has a good developer or user experience, whichever you are. And yeah. And the third, probably Redis. We use Redis a lot at appwrite. We use it for everything. We have a joke. We say we use Redis for everything but making coffee. Yeah, we use it for queue caching, and I think Redis is a good example for a tool that makes a good balance between flexibility and simplicity. Yeah. It's very easy to get started. You can do a lot of things with Redis, and it keeps it always feels very, very simple and with a very, very small learning curve.
Yeah, I totally agree. Great 3 projects, by the way. Yeah. So Eldad, that's it for now, and so thank you very much for joining. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll hope you see you guys in our next episode. Stay tuned.